My name is Jeffrey Zielinski. I am co-founder of the Serviceberry Group and host of our Branch Network podcast. I'm really excited for today's conversation where we're going to try our best to demystify, if you will, occupational therapy. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that I was somewhat of a skeptic in the beginning. I think that was probably just due to lack of understanding of what OT, occupational therapy, is and was at the time. But I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, certainly with your help and some of the interactions that we've had over the years, I am a believer. I'm actually a promoter, if that makes any sense. When I talk to family and colleagues that might otherwise be thinking about this or have heard the words like your child might benefit or maybe requires occupational therapy, I'm certainly one of those people raising my hand saying that you ought to consider it, because there have been some remarkable progress that I've seen in my son. Again, thanks to you and the work that you've done with him over the years. But I'll pass it to you. So my friend now, Lexi, occupational therapist, why don't you introduce yourself and we'll have a little bit of a conversation setting a baseline about occupational therapy.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. My name is Lexi Disbrow. I've been an occupational therapist for about 5 years now, and I love it. I found out about occupational therapy when I was in high school. Actually, my sister, who has autism, actually went through it with occupational therapy, and I just saw a big difference in just how people showed up for her and how much we learned from the process.
Yeah.
So then when I did go to college, I wound up majoring in it and love it. And I still love it to this day. So I'm very lucky to be able to do something I love.
Yeah, it's noble work, to say the least. So I guess for starters, why don't you just in plain English tell us what OT is? What is occupational therapy, maybe from both an academic but also a practical standpoint?
Yeah, so occupational therapy, we work with people along the spectrum of all different age ranges, right? So we can work with babies in the NICU, we can work with people in nursing homes maybe that have dementia, we can work with people who have spinal cord injuries and children as well. So right now I'm working with pediatrics, and what we do is we basically want to help people, or children in this instance, become independent in what they need to do in their daily lives. We call them occupations. So a child's occupation is going to be playing, right? Like that's what they're doing, or going to school. They're students, they're a brother or a sister, maybe they play, like that's what they're doing. Whereas when we become adults, we have different occupations where that's we're going to work, we're a mother, we're a father, things like that.
Sure.
So we want to make sure whatever client or person we're working with becomes as independent as possible.
Sure.
So that can look different for age ranges because everyone's doing different things or have different expectations. So for example, like with kids, we're looking at their balance, maybe we're looking at their sensory processing. That's going to be a big topic tonight, probably. Maybe we're looking at the way that they're socially participating with their peers or even their siblings or parents, just so they can do their day-to-day tasks a little bit easier and with more independence. So that could be toileting, getting dressed, going into the shower, or even as they get older, chores, making friends, things like that. So I really love occupational therapy because of that, because so many people talk about healthcare getting burnt out. And I feel in this profession, you can just go to different aspects and,
Well, I'll tell you, that's probably one of the first things that I observed. Again, being somewhat of a skeptic, I think because I didn't know anything about occupational therapy, I thought it was like, all right, well, you're going to teach them how to use a pen or pencil, right? To me, it was somewhat basic and linear. And what I learned pretty quickly is that, and just like so many of the things we talk about on the podcast, it's pretty infinitely wide, not just from, the skills, but also some of the ancillary benefits that come with the things that you're working on. Maybe talk about that more in just a second. But for me, that was one of the first sort of eye-opening experiences that I had. You weren't working on like a skill and then moving on. It was sort of integrating all of these things. In
Mm-hmm.
this case, for my son's, long-term outcomes, which in a short term have been pretty remarkable. You kind of hit on it already, but thinking about those sort of real life examples, I'm very keen on the ancillary benefits. You work on I mentioned writing, but whatever they may be. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of branch effect, if you will, if that makes sense, of, when you work on one skill, it's not necessarily that skill on its own that's benefiting, it's a range of other skills and things that come along with that.
Definitely. So, for example, for the sake of this conversation, we can talk about pediatrics because that's
Sure.
where I'm working
Yep.
right now. That's my jam. I love it.
Yeah.
But we talk a lot and observe a lot of sensory processing. So all of your senses, there's more than five, so that many people don't know about. But for example, things that most people might not know is like the proprioceptive system. So how is the child moving within their environment?
Mm-hmm.
Or the interoceptive system, which is, are they feeling that they're hungry? Are they feeling that
Sure.
they need to go to the bathroom? Things like that, as well as the vestibular system. So are they tolerating different movements, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like some kids get car sick. Some kids are nervous about going on rides at amusement parks. So things like that. So as well as the five senses that everyone knows.
Right.
So we look at those types of processes, and it's different for every kid.
Sure.
So we kind of look at that first as a baseline, because once a child is quote unquote regulated, meaning all of their sensory systems are working together, that's when their attention kicks in, and that's when they're ready to learn or ready to participate in what they need to be doing. So while working on those systems, like I know back in the day, I remember like working with your son, and like we were like, oh, we did foot massages today. And you were like, can I go to PT?
It sounds
And
great.
as a parent or anyone really is like, what are you actually working on?
Mm-hmm.
But every child is seeking or not so much seeking something different. So
Yes.
it's like, are you going to give them that input they need, or are you going to slowly introduce it maybe if they're averse to something? For example, like tags in their clothing, or some kids don't love putting socks on. So it's really...
Or love taking them off in that case.
Some kids love being barefoot,
Right.
So it's like working on those systems is kind of the pyramid at which we start at.
Sure.
So that's more so of a baseline. So like the vestibular system, like I said earlier, like we might work on that if a child is lacking balance, to be able to put their shoes on, or to be able to stand and put their pants on. So it's working on systems to then make it to the next level per se.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, like you said, it's not just we're working on handwriting and then once he or she is done with handwriting, we're moving to the next task. It's kind of, they're all blending together.
Bingo. Yeah, it's a good way to put it. You hit on this a little bit, and thinking about children in particular, but do you find that there's a certain, I don't call it demographic, but category of child, or what do you think is like, do you have a type, like, or is it just based on what the actual needs of that particular child are, and that's what determines the therapeutic intervention? Could you talk just a little bit about that element?
Yeah. So it's funny because a lot of people in the past have asked me like, oh, do you work with people with this disability, or like, do a lot of your kids that you see have autism? And
that's exactly what I'm thinking, right?
And it's a lot of people think that because there's a diagnosis, they need occupational therapy. But I'll tell you, in the past, like more so than not, a lot of my children that I worked with did not have a diagnosis. And you actually don't, in New Jersey, you don't need a doctor's script to get occupational therapy. So you technically don't really need a diagnosis either to get it. That's not to say that the children that have diagnoses wouldn't benefit, because they would as well. But because we work on so many different things, there's a lot of children that can benefit. So like I've had children that I've worked with that just have a lot of meltdowns, and emotionally they need that social emotional help.
Yeah.
Which also then ties into the sensory, but as a parent you might not make that connection. And why should you if you don't have that background, you know?
Yeah.
So there's a wide demographic, I would say.
Yeah.
It could be anything like motorically as well, like maybe they're sports wise they're a little clumsy or things like that, or their coordination is not that good.
Yeah.
Or it could just be this my child needs help with handwriting, like how can we get his grasp better, how can we make her handwriting more legible. So it really is a lot of different things in one, and I think that's what you said earlier makes sense of like you can be so skeptical because it's like, what actually are you doing? And we're doing so much that it can get confusing.
And I'll tell you, like, we'll talk maybe about like how the parent therapist interaction should look, but it's been years since we've met you, and we still maybe daily use a lot of the techniques, whether it's, pressure, the pillows, the blankets, the things that you've recommended over the years, we still use to this day because they make a real difference. In fact, he seeks a lot of it.
Yeah.
If there's a time where our son is really struggling with regulating his emotions, he'll go through his ranges and take his deep breaths and stuff like that. And can you squeeze the jelly out of me? Which is his way of telling us, can I have a tight hug? And so those skills really work, not just from like a mechanical standpoint, but from a practical standpoint to help with whatever, situation it is that he's going through. I would tell you my anecdote, but I want to hear from you. And you did hit on it a little bit, but, and coming at it as a former skeptic, like what would you say to parents are some of the reasons or signs that somebody might at least consider the evaluation for whether or not OT is going to make sense for their child? For us, I can tell you, I believe it was prior to a diagnosis is when we first saw you guys. And it was a lot of emotional regulation. And it was actually, I believe, a conversation with a speech therapist who had said, he may benefit from this. But again, I was a skeptic. How would you break that ice for somebody who might, be sitting in my former shoes? And what are some of the things that those parents might want to look for to say, what, if nothing else, let's get the evaluation, determine what skills are maybe lacking or things that this child could benefit from OT?
Yeah. I feel like when there's an evaluation, and correct me if I'm wrong, because sometimes it could be overwhelming for a parent. Like
150 million%.
Yeah, there's a lot.
And that only doubled down my skepticism.
There's a lot of information, and we are looking at so many different aspects that you're like, that wasn't even on my radar. Like, and I have found, because after speaking with parents, I found that it's very important to speak with them after an evaluation. Once they read the report, once they like dive into it a little bit more, then have a conversation about it, because then it opens the door for like, okay, you might have not seen that previously, but we picked up on it, and then it's like, is it an actual concern? Because at the end of the day, what your concerns are or what the parents' concerns are what should be our concerns as well.
Right.
But then we want to educate as well on like why that may be happening, or what we saw that maybe something needs to work on a little bit more to then get to the skill that you want to target as a parent.
Yeah.
So I think an evaluation is helpful because it can show the parent and educate them on maybe why their child is doing what they're doing, kind of the education behind it. And I think it brings a sort of an awareness. For example, children with maybe aggressive behaviors, like the parents may become frustrated or things like that. And through an evaluation, you can kind of see if maybe their sensory system is a little bit off, or maybe they're lacking something, or like you said, they need input that they're seeking that we don't know about yet.
Yeah.
So I think it's helpful for parents to get an evaluation, as it may be overwhelming, but at the same time, once you dive into it a bit more with someone who can speak on it in layman's terms, I think it would be helpful just to bring that awareness and that like education to it.
150%, because I can tell you in talking to parents or maybe folks that are going through this for the first time, like there's a lot of language in there I just didn't understand. I still don't
Yes.
understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary. You're for us, and I'm sure for other folks that are going through this. I think you said it so well. You kind of, for us, we went to get an evaluation for one or two things,
Mm-hmm.
and then we get, a 6 to 10 page document detailing all of these other deficiencies, and not that they were all deficient. There were some skills there, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but we were like, this isn't what we asked for.
Yeah.
And again, fast forward, it didn't take very long for me to find out that all of these skills and in some cases deficiencies were very much woven together, which I guess kind of begs the next question is the parent's role in the evaluation. I know, again, putting on my denial first hat, I kind of didn't want to know it, and that was part of my journey. Just from even to this day, there's a lot of things that you kind of want to look past, but you shouldn't. You got to face these things head on, and I would encourage anybody to do that. Easier said than done. I totally accept that, but I would encourage everybody to face these issues head on. But as you think about the evaluation for the individual, for the child, the boy or the girl, what would you say is the parent's role other than just the obvious of here's little Jimmy and, do what you want with it? How would you encourage that sort of interaction to look like?
So for me, I would say what's best is to get an initial phone call. Or as a parent, you're filling out an intake form, or maybe you're filling out a sensory profile, which is the sensory system's broken down and it's just a questionnaire of like, is your child doing this? Is your child doing this? And then the therapist then can have a standardized test that shows data of what their sensory system may look like, what they're seeking, what they're averse to. And that's from a parent's perspective of what you're seeing day to day in the house. So from the parent's perspective and what their role is would be gathering all that information, gathering your concern as a parent.
Be upfront.
Yes. Like tell me everything so that when I go in, not only am I prepared, but I know more so of what to look for.
Sure.
So if your child doesn't go on the playground with their peers at school or is nervous about going on rides, maybe I won't put them on a swing initially, or I won't push for that.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Things of like that. So I think the parents are so crucial because I want to hear your concerns because again, I might have concerns, but your concerns are what comes first as a parent.
Yeah. And even on the opposite side of that, I think one of the reasons you bonded so well with our son is because you knew not only the avoidance behavior, but things he really was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So like I used to crack up because they'd end a session like coming out like on your shoulders and singing a song like he was on a boat because he thrived in that environment. I guess maybe most kids probably would with that sort of positive reinforcement. But like you made the joke about like the foot massage, just like gosh, like this doesn't look half bad, you know. But you knew what he was seeking and how he responded to rewards, and you put that into his sort of ecosystem. And I think that's when things really started to click. So maybe that like scary, for him, he was kind of sensitive with like certain motions and stuff like that. I think he built such a trust with you that first of all, there's going to be a reward at the end of the tunnel. You knew, how to reward him, but it was like, all right, now there's motivation for me to test this scary thing. And that really came together really nicely in his case. Maybe not all kids are the same, but I know for him, it worked well.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up building that, like him trusting me, because that's like, with pediatrics especially, the number one thing that we should all be doing is if a child is not trusting you, then they're not going to allow their bodies to trust you as well, because they don't even sometimes have control of their own bodies, which is a scary feeling.
Oh, yeah.
For anyone.
I was just going to say that, literally for anybody.
Yeah, like sometimes if I'm getting car sick, I'm like, I hate this, but I can't control it. So I can only imagine how a child must feel when they're
100%.
When their sensory systems or something is not right and they sometimes can't even express it. So that makes it scarier on top of it.
Yeah. The way that I've thought about this over the years is that this evaluation, this process of figuring out whether or not there's going to be a benefit, going through the evaluation, determining what the sort of therapeutic intervention is going to look like, and that evolves over time. This isn't a test. This isn't a pass fail kind of a thing. It's really more about understanding the child's needs and how we can provide an infrastructure for that child to garner more skills to enhance their likelihood of long-term successful outcomes. And I
Yeah.
think that's part of the reason we're, building this group, is to kind of help parents sift through some of that, because again, so much of this process, Lexi, and I'm sure you know this in your personal and your professional life, it's very isolating.
Yeah.
And you don't know what you don't know. And I think if we look at these occupational therapy, speech therapy, we look at these interventions through a lens of like a more pragmatic lens, I guess is what I'm looking for. I think it kind of helps put those defenses down, and to hear it from you, to hear it from other parents, we hope helps other people to break down those walls and say,
Yeah.
look, this isn't about figuring out things that are wrong with my child. It's about how do we create an environment for them to take advantage of the skills that they have to build other skills. And so that was a huge success for us.
Yeah, and I always tell parents that I work with, ask me anything.
Mhm.
Like, don't feel like it's a stupid question. Like, I want to explain it to you.
Yeah, and that's so true, because like, he had a I remember in the beginning, he actually had a resistance to going into the sessions. Then he liked it so much, he had a resistance to coming out, right? And so, but we always talked to you about this. If he, I remember at one point transitions were very difficult.
Yes.
Whether it was going to the park, whether it was, leaving ShopRite, whatever it was, transitions were very, very challenging for a long period of time. And we made sure to tell you, like, look, I'm telling you, it's going to be tough to get him out. And that's when we started seeing you, flying him around the roller coaster. But again, you took that feedback very seriously and applied it to him. It took some time,
Yeah.
but I'll never forget one of those first few times where it was like we had a successful exit. It's like getting that elevator, just like, we did it.
Yes,
We
and
did it.
problem solving together.
Bingo.
And that's what I think is so important. That's why I like to tell my parents that I work with, like, tell me anything. Like, if they're having a bad day, I want to know about it. I want to know what happened prior to the quote unquote meltdown, or maybe just a moment. It doesn't always have to be a meltdown.
100%.
Or what happened right after, just so because a lot of OT is being a detective. Like, I kind of joke with my dad because he's a retired detective. I'm like, I kind of did what you're doing.
You've done it better, probably.
He might say that too, but it's kind of figuring out like why this is happening, and that way, because we're on the same team. Like,
100%.
so I tell the parents I work with, like, tell me, don't be afraid to text me on a day I don't see you. Like, I want to know because I want to help. I don't want to come into a session, do what I have to do, and then that's it. Then I see you next week.
Yeah.
That's not how I like to do therapy, and not many people do it that way anyway.
No, I'll tell you, and it's a personal anecdote, but Patty and I have been so steadfast on collaboration, whether it's with the speech therapists, occupational therapists, the school. And unfortunately, not all people in the environment that we operate in think that way.
Yeah, and it's sad.
It is sad. I would rather tell somebody something 500,000 times to the point where they're like, Jeff, I get it. You don't need to tell me anymore. Because as a parent, that'll help me feel more comfortable. When you're not having that communication, then things come as a surprise. Then you don't know how to react to those things. And then it kind of just unravels. So collaboration is huge. I wish there was more proponents for collaboration, but it doesn't seem that way universally, unfortunately. Obviously not for you.
It's sad. I wish it wasn't like that. And I'm sorry to hear that you guys have experienced that.
Yeah.
But even me, like, if I'm working with a child and their parents, then I say, like, what other services are they getting? Like, I would love to reach out, because I'm seeing,
and not everyone does that.
Yeah. And what I'm seeing in my session might be what someone else is seeing, or what they're struggling with might be something that I have a strong suit with. And then we can collaborate and help each other.
Yeah.
So
I just had a conversation with Renee, who did the travel episode with me, and she made such a good point that I hadn't even thought of before. It's not that like each one of these kids are different, because they are. Each moment could be different.
Yes.
Each day could be different. The interventions could be different. It's an evolution. It's keeping up with the goals and the outcomes and the successes that you have, but also adding new goals and things for kid to work on. And so the collaboration is everything, because it's always going to be an evolution. And she's so right on the money about that. I don't know if there's a typical way to answer this next question, but get the evaluation, determine that, occupational therapy would be of a benefit.
Mhm.
What does a session look like? And again, that's probably somewhat of a loaded question because it could look different in so many different ways. But walk us through a little bit. You had mentioned play
Yes.
in pediatrics. Like, I'm really keen on hearing more about that. So it's something that we still work on. The social aspect. It's actually part of the reason we did this, is we think the social, point of view is so important to these kids' development. But talk a little bit about that play, therapeutic intervention. What does that look like when you're working with a child?
So after the evaluation, what I like to do is I like to build a rapport. Like we said earlier,
definitely.
It's very important to build trust. So in the first 2 to 3 sessions, I might not be giving demands as much. I have an idea of what I want to work on, and that's where DIR therapy comes into play, because that is all about building relationship and while you're playing. So it's about following the child's lead and helping them kind of make connections with what they like. So it's not me bringing in a puzzle and being like, okay, Johnny, like,
Sure.
let's sit and do this puzzle. I want to work on your visual motor skills. It's more, what is Johnny navigating towards? What does he love? And let's build upon that. Johnny might love cars. So, okay, let's play with cars and see where we can go with that. So first things first, building the rapport, seeing what the child gravitates towards, seeing what they like, and using that as a motivator.
Yes.
Because if therapy isn't motivating and if therapy isn't fun, especially for kids, because that's their occupation is play, then what are they doing? They're not going to succeed. So that's kind of the first steps of what you're working on. And then what are the parents' main concerns? So then we go through it that way. Like you said, your son had difficulty with moving his body in different ways. So it's like, okay, how can we slowly integrate that? Maybe it's putting him on a blanket on the floor and slowly pulling him around, right? Because his feet are still on the ground. So it's slowly building up to a swing or things like that. And some people might ask, like, why is it so important for a child to go on a swing? And it's not that it's important for him or her to go on a swing. It's more so, I want their body to feel safe when they're going from the ground to standing, when they're stepping into a car, when they're getting out of a car, or even curbs when they're navigating their environment outside. So it's not so much what they're doing potentially, but it's how their body's responding, how confident they get, things of that nature. So it's building up the skills and then getting to the goals that you're working on.
As you're thinking about it from like an individual point of view, obviously I think it's a necessity to do just what you said, which is figure out what motivates him or her. Tell us a little bit about the social piece of it. I think one thing that you did really, really well, my son, I've talked about it before, is like a social butterfly. But sometimes his use of social skills isn't maybe where they should be, for a lack of better words. And I remember you would work with him pretty deliberately to, say hi to a boy or a girl, or, do a puzzle with them. Talk to us a little bit about that element of the sort of therapeutic intervention.
Yeah. So basically, we want our children to succeed in everyday life. And because of that, they're probably going to school. So or if they're not going to school, maybe they have cousins they play with, maybe neighbors, sisters or brothers. So I think it's very important to include that social piece as well. And what I think is important is making it natural, right? So like in the environment we were in, there was other kids around. So when he would see a child, he'd be like running over to that child and we would be like, okay, let's stop. Let's first say hi. We can introduce ourselves, or maybe that child doesn't want a hug if you want to give them a hug. It's kind of
which he loves to do.
It's kind of bringing that awareness to them of like, okay, we have to actually ask someone, can I give you a hug? And then it's also helping that child advocate for themselves if maybe they don't want a hug, or maybe they're a little bit trickier with sharing. So it's it's like, let's play with this child as well, but let's work on taking turns. Let's work on sharing, because those are benefits that kids need in their everyday lives as well. So it's kind of making those moments more natural instead of forced.
Exactly, because what I was going to ask you, but you sort of just answered it, is like, if and on one hand, if you're letting the child lead you with their motivations, and let's say potentially there's another therapeutic session going on and that child is being led by their motivations. Now children meet, there could be some degree of
Yeah.
motivational conflict there. And so having you all sort of secure that parameter such that you're encouraging or discouraging certain behaviors, I think, again, has really paid dividends for us, but also, to your point that you just said, makes it more natural, which is incredibly important. You talked about it already, but I want to dive a little bit deeper on the independence piece of it. I guess children by default are somewhat not independent. They require a good deal of structure, but the goal is to get them to be independent. So as you're thinking about skills and intervening to help them get to those skills so that there's, again, ancillary benefits to just day-to-day life, how do you think about independence in the short and long term, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So in the short term, it's more so building on what they can already do. For example, let's just use getting dressed. There's so many different components to getting dressed.
100%.
You have to put your shoes on. You have to put your socks on. You also have to put your underwear on or your diaper.
There's an order to it.
Yeah, there's an order, and people do it in different orders. So kind of breaking down those tasks and seeing where the child can go or what their strong suits are. So it might be that I help them put their shirt on and then they maybe do the zipper or the button, or maybe they do their pants and the parent does the shirt, vice versa. So it's basically getting that child to become independent with less assistance. So say they need you to complete the whole task, but maybe a month from now, you do half and they do half. So it's slowly building those skills so that they're getting to their independence. And it's then finding out what is making it so difficult and then working towards that, working on that specific skill. Like I said earlier, maybe it's the coordination, maybe it's the fine motor skills, maybe it's they're processing the feeling of the shirt or the pants differently.
100%.
So it's, again, tying back to being a detective unofficially.
Officially.
Figuring out why that is, too.
Yeah.
So trying to become as independent as possible.
Yeah. So you brought up something that's really interesting to me, sort of indirectly. And it goes a little bit back to the collaboration piece. So in our case, we've had speech therapy, ABA, occupational therapy, some other things, some even sports and swim, things that we've done for extracurriculars and stuff like that. One thing that Patty and I have been somewhat sensitive to is balancing almost too much. Especially because our days were so tight, and you don't want to tire the child out because that might be deflating to him or her. So when you think about OT, like in a session, first of all, I'm assuming the answer is yes, but I'll ask you anyway. Like, are you taking into account what some of the other therapeutic intervention might be? And is that kind of weighing into how long a specific session should be, how many days per week, or is that just more contingent on the needs of the child? Is it a mix of all of it? Curious to know how you're thinking about that, but also from a collaborative point of view, how you're thinking about, okay, well, if we're doing occupational therapy on a Wednesday and I know that this child's going to have ABA, how are we, kind of bringing that together to, again, create that environment for the child?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I have gotten asked that a lot. For OT specifically, how I figure out if a child needs OT once a week or twice a week or maybe bi-weekly is based on the parents' concerns, what I see in an evaluation, and what I think the child would benefit from. So a kid who might be getting twice a week might have a lot of needs, a lot of things that the parents and the therapist both want to work on, who maybe is a bit younger and can benefit from coming twice a week, because once a week is sometimes tricky, right? You're coming on, say, a Tuesday, and then you don't have it again until the following Tuesday. So it kind of depends on the child's needs and what's looking to be achieved. However, like you said, you brought up a good point that sometimes the child needs a break, like a day
Yeah.
of absolutely nothing, because they are going to school.
Yeah,
That's like a
exactly.
full-time job.
They're people.
Yeah, they're going to school, they're
Yeah.
doing it, might have homework. So it's a lot of responsibility for them. And school in and of itself is very complex for a child,
Hmm.
especially with a child with a lot of different needs.
Sure.
There's a lot of demands, there's a lot of maybe transitions, there's a lot that goes into it. So I like to acknowledge that. And I always say to parents, they shouldn't be doing everything every day,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Even it depends on the kiddo and it depends on the parents, because I can only give my opinion, right? I'm not telling you how to parent your child. That's
Sure.
not how I operate. But if you're asking for my opinion, I will tell you. And that's kind of how I like to operate, because I don't want to step on toes
Of
either.
course.
I'm not a parent, so I don't know what that's like. So I do like to give advice when it's warranted and when it's wanted. But I will say that, connecting to what you said earlier, the children do need a break because they're kids, right? They should come home and be able to play after school. They should
Yeah.
come home and have dinner with their family, right? Because like you said, if you're going from one place to the other, like is the whole family having genuine family
Yeah.
time as well? Are they
It can be
having
counterproductive.
Yeah. Are you guys having dinner together? There's other siblings. Do they have other sports they need to
Bingo.
go to? So it's hard when when the child can benefit from all of these other therapies, but I think it's worthwhile to space it out. And I've had some kids who are doing so well that myself and the parents are like, let's take a break. Let's take a break for a month or 3 months,
Sure.
see how it goes, and then come back. Because I've had some families who are nervous to actually end services or take a break, which makes sense.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it's like, can I do this? Is he or she going to regress? So
Bingo.
so it's also giving the parents that confidence and the tools to succeed when they do take a break or when they do stop. Because like you said, kiddos are still going to be seeking those types of movements or those types of
Yep.
feelings for their body. So if we're not setting the parents up for success, then we're failing ourselves.
Couldn't agree with you more. Want to kind of dovetailing off of that a little bit. One of the things that I think we've talked about maybe in every episode I've done so far, which I guess there's only been 3, so far, is the small wins piece of this. Again, going back, you just laid a perfect foundation. Going to school, therapy maybe at school, then there's private sessions. There, in our case, there's swim, there's karate, there's all these things. There's always something going on. And that's by design. But I don't want to lose sight of, and something Patty and I as parents have been really keen on, is making sure that we're always making time to celebrate a win, no matter how big or small it may be.
I love that.
Because first of all, for us, candidly, some milestones have been met later than maybe they, a typical sense would be met. And I brought it up in one of the first episodes that we did, was like, I remember when he first wrote the letter of his first name, like, borderline sobbing.
Yeah.
But it's so important to be able to celebrate those little wins. Thinking about it from an occupational therapy standpoint, you're working on a lot of skills. A lot of those skills interconnect. They're sort of bleeding into other things that child may be doing from a therapeutic intervention, whether it's speech or something else. How important is it to Lexi to celebrate those small wins, which I know they are, by the way? And how are you thinking about that from a sort of evolution of goals standpoint?
I love celebrating small wins, and it's even
Facts.
it's even silly sometimes, because silly, I guess, to other people, not to me.
100%. Yep.
Because they're like, wait, you got so excited because of that? Like someone who might not understand what OT is, or have a child even. But even I remember one of my kids was so nervous to go on swings, never did, and then when he finally did get on a swing, I was like tearing, actually, because I was so excited that he felt so confident in his own body and safe in that moment, that's what he was able to do. And in turn, it wound up regulating him, and that was the kind of input he was seeking.
Yeah.
So it made sense, and it connected the dots. And it's these little things, like one of my kids today, for example, he traced the letters of his first and last name and he looked up and smiled
So
and
proud.
was proud of
Yeah.
himself. And I was like, I don't even care if he traced one letter, but the
Yeah.
fact that he acknowledged what he did, looked up and smiled, I was like, wow, that was such a
Yeah.
important moment. And those are the little things like that make me want to continue what I'm doing. And that's what
Amen.
I get excited
Amen.
about. It's like I love to see when kids are excited about things, or I want to be their biggest cheerleader because
Yeah.
things are hard. Life is hard.
Yes.
And it's especially with other challenges going on at the same time, it's not always easy to become independent in things. And that's why celebrating the small wins to get to the bigger ones is so important. And honestly, sometimes I like to educate my parents on like this was a big deal because sometimes parents, not all parents, but some parents get upset about what they can't be doing, and it's hard to look
Sure.
at the things they are doing or that they are going to be good at. And I have found that parents have shared with me they feel a little bit disappointed that
Yeah.
Johnny can't do this. And it's like, let's talk about what he can do and how we can get him to
Yeah.
doing that.
And as a parent, I can tell you, there's been times I've felt that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to harp on that, but it's a perfectly human, I think, response, particularly
Exactly.
as a parent, to go there.
Yeah.
And I know that I have. I think something that I've used to ground myself, I can speak for Patty as well, is I feel like sometimes we're probably not giving the children enough credit to the extent of the amount of work they're putting into meet these goals.
Yeah.
Things that we may take for granted, they're working exceptionally hard to get there. So, it might be a simple win, but that's why I think it's so important to validate those small wins because they've had to work so hard, and to see that sense of pride and like, look what I did. There's few feelings that are better than that. I have a couple more questions for you, and let me know if I missed anything. But I want to go back to the collaboration piece for just a second, because part of the reason Patty and I even started doing this whole thing was, in our case, the IEP process,
Okay.
which can feel on its own very isolating, very challenging, leaves you with probably more questions than answers, more often than not. And if you speak to this however you'd like, but collaborations with schools.
Okay.
What do you see there? Like, important, not important, difficult, not difficult?
I think it's definitely important. Now, I've worked in different settings with children. I've worked in early intervention going into their homes. I've worked in numerous schools, whether that's public, private, specialized schools. I've also worked in outpatient pediatrics. And what I have found from working in all those settings is that collaboration looks different in each setting.
Sure.
So I'm currently in a few schools right now, and what I have found is that when I worked at an outpatient pediatric gym and when I worked in the homes in early intervention, collaboration was so easy and seamless because you're face to face with the parent, and you're collaborating on like how that child's day was, or how they went to bed and things like that. Whereas at a school, it might be a little bit different because you have so many different kids because you're only seeing them for most of the time 30 minutes.
Sure.
Maybe that's once a week, maybe that's twice a week. And you're getting them from their class. So collaboration with the parents are going to look slightly different because you're also collaborating with the teacher. If they have a paraprofessional, you're communicating with them. You're communicating with their speech therapist, their ABA or DIR or physical therapist as well. However, even though it's not as frequent, I still think it's important. And the typical method, and I don't know how your school district does it, but where I do it at the different schools is via email.
Sure.
And we talk about how the child did that day and things of that nature. Because I think where things get lost in translation is because the parents are not physically there. Sometimes it's hard to keep up with how to communicate with them or like what they did in the session because it's not so face to face. But I do think it's needed, and I think it's necessary, especially when the IEPs come, because it's a lot.
And I think part of the the stress is that IEPs are rigid. If
Hmm.
I'm working with you on an individual basis, you'll have some creative liberties to
Yeah.
determine, okay, this isn't working, so let me try something else. Whereas if you want to make an alteration to an IEP, it's going to require some sense of formality,
Hmm.
meetings, an advocate potentially, and
Yeah.
even on the collaboration side of things, we've worked with folks that have been all in on collaboration. We've worked with folks that have been completely resistant to it, back to what we were saying earlier. So
Yeah.
I'm always just curious because that's kind of what drew us to even create this platform. So maybe we'll save that for another episode. So my last question, then I'll ask you if you have anything that you'd like to say. Certainly wanting to give you a chance to plug your business and all the amazing work that you're doing. But something that Patty and I literally still do to this day is use some of the skills that you provided us at home.
I love
And
that.
so as you're thinking about your interaction with a child, now they're in the car, they're heading home. What do you think is important for families, parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, grandparents, to take some of the skills? How should they be taking OT home?
Yeah. So I like that you asked that because a lot of my families that I work with, I give sensory diets, or maybe they're called different things, sensory strategies or things like
Yep.
that. It depends on the child. But if they're needing that sensory input, I might give them a sensory diet or a few activities to
Yeah.
do. However, I like to have a conversation with the parents prior to doing that because I like to ask, like, realistically, what can you do? What are
Yeah.
you
Good
looking
point.
for as a parent? How much time do you have? Do you have just 1 minute of the day,
Yeah.
or every other day you might have 3 minutes? Because as a parent, you have so many responsibilities.
3 children
Yeah,
crawling all over you all
not to
day.
mention other children as
Right.
well. So it's like, okay, if Johnny and Taylor want to do, or if they're siblings, but Johnny needs some type of input, maybe let's figure out how we can incorporate Taylor into it so she doesn't feel so left out. So
Hmm.
I like to kind of talk to the parents first about what you're looking for or what works for you, what time of day, things
Yeah.
like that. And it might not always be an activity. It might be wording, figuring out how to word things differently. It might be figuring out how to prepare your child for a transition. So it might not always be an actual activity that the child's doing, but it might just be strategies where as a parent you're thinking
Yeah.
about things differently. So I like to do that, give those types of tips as well, if it's needed and if it's wanted, because that can, even just saying no to a child
Yeah.
can derail their day because they don't know what no actually physically means, in the sense of, like, am I going to get it in a few hours, or am I,
That's a
is
good
it
point.
just
Yeah.
completely no? So like
Yeah.
that's a big strategy I tell parents is maybe telling the child not no, but maybe not right now, or maybe saying first we have to brush our teeth and then we can
Yeah.
read a bedtime story. Because for kids, no is just like, what does no mean? Is
Yeah.
it just it's never gonna happen?
There's
So
ambiguity there.
yeah,
No, I think that's we live in the when then.
yeah.
We live in the when then. Does it work universally? No, but what does?
Yeah.
But you're 100% right. There is power in the framing of that language because, and using your no example, you're right on the money. Does it mean no, like I'm not having a donut right now and I'll ask again in 5 minutes? Or does it mean no, but I can have it after I have my dinner? Like,
Yeah.
you're right on the money. We still use a lot of those skills to this day.
Yeah, and it's things you, like, anyone might not think about.
Yeah.
And it's also trial and error. A lot of these
Yeah,
strategies are
big time.
trial and error. The children and families I work with, I tell them, try this for a month. We'll get back to it and see how it worked. If it didn't work, let's figure out why, and then we tweak it, right?
Yeah.
Because like we said earlier, what might work one day might not work the next.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where it comes in, where we need to be creative and we need to figure out what the child actually needs in their day-to-day life to succeed. And in 6 months, that might not work. So then we have to go back to the drawing board, which
Exactly.
is totally fine.
And not to sound like a broken record, but it goes back to that collaboration with the parent piece, because we've worked with therapists like, oh, if your son's having a meltdown because of X, Y, and Z, tell him to hug a pillow. And we're like, no. And sometimes, like, it's not just telling you what works. I mean, it's like, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
It has to be an open, 100% genuine, good, bad, or indifferent. You got to just kind of hit it right on the head.
Yeah. And I always tell my families, like, if your child is succeeding in my therapy sessions, but then they're going home and you don't feel that I'm helping you or you don't feel as supported, then I'm failing as a therapist, because it's not just about what I'm doing in therapy. We want to translate that into the home.
Yeah.
And we want to succeed and let the child succeed in any environment they're going into.
Yeah. I love how you hold yourself to account like that. Again, I can speak with 100% sincerity. It is the absolute truth.
Thank you.
We've kept in touch with you for a reason. We love that we're friends. We love that we have this relationship with you. So before we wrap up, why don't you talk a little bit about your business, where people can find you, links to your resources, and I'd be remiss if I asked if you'd be willing to do this again.
Of course, I'd love to.
I think taking mental notes, there's 1,000 other things I wanted to ask you, but for the sake of everyone's time here, tell us a little bit about your business and where to find you and the resources.
So I partnered with a previous employee that I worked with. She's a DIR therapist. She's absolutely amazing. And I know I spoke about DIR a little bit before, but we worked together side by side, and she taught me what it was, because I didn't really know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I became such a better therapist when I incorporated DIR into my sessions, because it's really about the relationship and the motivation and what internally motivates the child to become connected with not just you, but with what they're doing. So we partnered together to provide home therapy services, OT and DIR services, as well as parent coaching. It's called Bridging Worlds OT DIR Therapy. So we have a website that's bridgingworldsotdir.com. And then our Instagram is bridgingworldsotdir. So
Great.
You can find us on there, and you can book services through there or kind of see what we do and things like that. And if you want to book a free consultation call and kind of just figure out if you would benefit from OT or what that would look like, then that's on there as well to do. And we kind of wanted to bridge the gap of, okay, we're doing this with the child, but how about at home? Like, I know I talked about strategies at home, but I like to go into the home now and see like what your home environment looks like. What's working? What's not working? What is the child actually having a hard time with? Is it dinner time? I'll come. My session could be that during dinner, seeing what happens, what they're actually struggling with, and can help them, because we want to bridge that gap. A lot of parents think like, oh, I don't have this fancy equipment. I don't have a swing. I don't have a big pillow or a crash mat. So let's figure out how we can replicate those types of tasks at home with the child's natural environment and what they have, because the truth is you don't need all of that fancy stuff.
Yeah. Again, as a witness of it, I can't tell you how true it is. The other therapist you work with actually did work with our child as well. Nothing but absolute praise. I'm so excited for you guys, for you both. I can't wait to see your reach and the impact that you have on other families, because I know we have felt it. So I'll ask Hannah, who couldn't join us today, to figure out how to plug that on social, because that is not my strength. But we'll figure out how to promote it through socials and get your website out there and all that kind of stuff. But before we wrap up, do you have any comments or anything you think we missed?
I don't know. Like you said, there's so many different topics, but I'm so happy to be on this podcast, and I'd love to come back. So thank you for having me, because I love OT because of just the vast variety of things you can work on. And I feel like because I started OT because of a personal passion, it just makes what I want to do and how I show up for families so much more important to me, because my family had no idea back when we figured all of this out, what to do, how to act. My sister was having meltdowns in the mall, and I was in high school babysitting her and nervous, like, oh my God, everyone's staring at me. Like, and it's scary. And I just want to be able to help families just like we received help, and just kind of bring that awareness. And you're not alone. Like you said earlier, it's a scary journey. And
it is. And
it could be isolating. And I just want to help as many people as possible, even if it's just giving little tips and tricks,
Amen. Couldn't have said it better. I agree with everything you said, so I won't repeat it. But Hannah would kill me again. If you haven't already, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, We're really excited to continue to be on this journey and building this community. Lexi, thank you so much. And for everybody else, be on the lookout for more of our content. Be sure to follow the Serviceberry Group and the Branch Network podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you again real soon. Take care, everybody.
Good night.
Adios.